Welcome to the Baunfire. I am Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this is a podcast about video game news, speculation, rumors, and reviews. This week, I'll be covering the Division 3's announcement, Xbox's rather substantial leak, first thoughts on Lies of P and Cyberpunk 2.0, and much, much more. A few things before we get started. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and comment with your thoughts, questions for next week, or to just say hello. A special thank you to all of my patrons, including producer level patrons, Hassan and Horseman, supporter level patrons, PK, The Dawn, Cage Nephilim, and NeuroNix, and viewer level patron, Zenra. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and getting ad-free episodes for as little as $1 a month, please check out patreon.com/BonDiesel. Gaming news, let's get into it. We have 11 topics. The first topic is not the biggest one, but it's the one I wanted to talk about the most to start off, and it's not that long. The Division 3 has been announced. So on Thursday, the 21st of September, Ubisoft Massive made a tweet and had a press release that basically just said, hey, Julian Garrity, who's creative director on Division 1 and 2, and now Star Wars Outlaws, he, after Outlaws releases, is going to be made the basically the director of the Division franchise. They also confirmed along with that one of the games he would be kind of over would be the Division 3. This was a pretty big deal and not surprising all at once for me. I had a bit of a torrent of tweets the day that this happened and that afternoon or evening, because I've been saying for especially the last few months, but really for years, I found the video all the way back to 2020 where I was talking about the Division 3. I felt like this was always like going to happen eventually, and that it was like an obvious thing to happen one day. I wouldn't have guessed it would take this long. One of the things about this announcement in a video that Julian did recently on the Massive channel is that they are building a team for the Division 3. That might mean they're in pre-production. It might not, but it definitely means they are very early in the process of developing this game. And some commentary I saw that this is probably happening. The Division 3 makes sense. Putting Julian in charge of the whole franchise makes sense. But this may have been a play to maybe do a little bit of stock price mending. So this is obviously an announcement that would do well with the investors for Ubisoft. The Division 1 and 2 were very successful games financially, and the Division 2 was especially well reviewed at launch. And while both of the games had kind of up and down support after launch, they've both been, pretty well loved and really well respected. It's among the fan base, you find that there's a lot of people, or maybe a vocal minority, who really still sing the praises of the first game, and some people who are disappointed with the second. I personally prefer the second game, even though I think they're both great. But what's unfortunately or fortunately matters more to Ubisoft and to some of the greater gaming public. The Division 2, reviewed really well when it released. It was very popular. It was very feature rich, especially when we think about the other games like Destiny 2 and some of the other games in a similar genre that, kind of released in rough spots. The Division 2 was pretty darn good at launch, despite, some technical issues. The Division 2's issue really long-term was that they kind of obviously never intended on making it a long-term project, where after, the game released and then we had a year of content and then we didn't have anything at all for a whole year, basically. And then they've had, the year 3 and 4, and now we're currently in year 5 of content, have had the seasonal content with manhunt and some of this, interesting content. But it's, it's pretty good for what they have available to make it. The team that's done a lot of the ongoing work for the Division 2 has been fairly small, because most of the Division 2 development team went to the Star Wars Outlaws project after Warlords of New York released in 2020. So, the Division 3, exciting for me. We don't know any details about it. Known details may be pretty sparse about it. They may be in the very early stages of deciding what kind of game this is even going to be, where it's going to take place. The year 5 of the Division 2's content is going to wrap up in the spring. I imagine that is going to be the springboard to wherever and whenever and whoever the Division 3 is going to cover. But I'm excited. If there was anyone yesterday who was trying to do the pessimism thing, yesterday was not the day. The reveal of the third game in the franchise. That's the only reason this podcast exists, my streaming exists, my YouTube exists. That's going to be a happy day for me, no matter what. We can be pessimistic later. So I apologize if I was a bit short with anyone, but that wasn't the day to yuck my yum. It's okay to every now and then just enjoy a thing and worry about the details later. At least that's my opinion. So Division 3 is coming. Really excited. I hope it's in Chicago in the winter, and that they ditch PvP and that we don't get more raids, we get incursions instead. And the DZ becomes a really dangerous co-op zone like it always should have been. Anyways, Xbox effed up really bad. In the next story, Xbox leaked an absolute gigaton of information, and it was their own fault. So apparently they were filing some type of information to the FTC. They were making it available. And basically they revealed hundreds and thousands of documents that were obviously very confidential, because someone didn't post or didn't secure the link. So it seems like the way this was working is they were submitting paperwork to the FTC so both sides could have access to the information, and the link was probably supposed to be password protected or have some kind of verification needed to access, but someone posted it and it had zero checks or passwords or anything. And so people obviously, clicked on it when they realized what was going on, and saved and printed and have made numerous articles over the last few days about the things found in that. So let's talk about some of those things that were found. Mid-gen refresh consoles. So it seems like there's going to be a new Series S and Series X, but they're not going to get like new names. This isn't going to be like the Xbox One X, where this is just going to be, it's still going to be called the Series S and the Series X. The Series S looks like it's going to basically receive internal updates only, and it's also making that 2 terabyte console, or the 1 terabyte console, standard. And then the Series X is interesting. It's going to go to what looks to be like a cylindrical form factor, but that pretty much has the same hardware in it besides the disk drive. And honestly, what it looks like to me is it's probably basically the same shape and hardware and all of that of the Series X, but since they don't have to put in the disk drive, it doesn't require that like boxy component, and it looks like they're just basically making a different case for what the existing Series X is. There was some indication that they may be using a smaller CPU core, but that it's expected that it's more of a efficiency thing than a power thing. That they aren't. No one I've seen so far in my own reading of this material doesn't really indicate that this is supposed to be like a more powerful console. That it's just going to be a smaller form factor, and it's not going to have the disk drive, and it's going to have a standard 2 terabytes of storage, as well as the expansion card and all of that fun stuff. One interesting thing is that in a comparison chart between all of the systems, it mentions a Series X and then another Series X that indicates you're going to be able to design your own Series X in their game lab. So the way that with the controllers right now, you can customize your controllers pretty heavily. And it looks like they're actually going to bring that to the console as well, at least with the Series X. That's really cool if you get to pick from different colors and maybe even textures and patterns and things like that. That's going to be pretty neat. So I think people are actually going to like that quite a bit. Another part of this mid-gen thing is that it's expected, which is expected in 2024, both of those consoles, is that there's also a new controller. Some of the reporting on this has been kind of weird. The big notable things is that it's going to have like replaceable thumbsticks, like easily replaceable thumbsticks, that it's going to have haptics. That sounds a lot like they're going to be basically doing what the PlayStation 5 does with its really good haptics in its controller. There was some people talking about it has like a really different shape. I think it's the angle of the picture or the render of the controller that we saw. It does have like a weird thing where it looks like the bottom part of the controller, like that you actually hold on to, is going to be rubberized, which creates this kind of ugly appearance where the top was white and the bottom was black, that it looks like it has like pants on its legs. That angle also was kind of weird, where it made the handle parts look like they were really long and like not as big as they are in the current controller. Something I pointed out in a podcast, right, or in my stream where we talked about this, is I showed a current Series X controller and showed that if you look at it at an odd angle, it looks a lot different. But then if you look at it straight on, it's fine. I'm fairly certain this new controller is the current controller, maybe a little rounded off in places and things like that. But overall, I think it's the exact same controller, but it's going to have the haptics and stuff. I also saw some people kind of bemoaning that it's still going to have a battery port, like a battery area where you can put in AAAs or AA batteries. And acting like that was a bad thing. Like that's like a Sony fan only thing I've ever seen. I'm sure there's some people who put in like non-rechargeable AA's into their Xbox controller whenever it runs out, but I have to imagine the vast majority of people like myself have recharge packs. Xbox sells recharge packs and a recharge cord that you can charge through the main port on the controller. And I even got to the point where I bought a custom recharge thing where the amount of stored power is like 3 times more than the base controller and like the PlayStation 5. And so, I think it's interesting that you see, the Sony controllers are obviously amazing, but like when that battery dies in there and stops working, like you can open it up and replace it, I guess. But a lot of people aren't going to do that. They're just going to buy a new controller. And that's one thing I've always liked about Xbox controllers, is that they have the replaceable batteries. And if you use a battery pack, one that you can recharge, it's extremely useful. I believe, is it the Elite controller, I think, has an internal pack. And as great as that controller is, it also has a lot of other issues. So I've never bothered with getting one because I think the base controllers are awesome. So looks like we're getting a slight update to those, and I will probably buy one. Another part of the leak was it confirmed that they, at least at one point, had plans for a 2028 next-gen console. What's interesting about this to me is that it referenced this thing of being like, we're going to combine the power of the cloud and hardware to blah, blah, blah. They've been saying this stuff for many, many years. That's not going to happen, at least not in any big way, in my opinion. The more interesting things is that they may switch their CPU architecture. So a big deal about the 360 and the PS3 is that they both use non-standard CPUs that used a programming architecture that was unique to them. The main issue with that being that I think it was the PlayStation was the Cell processor, I think, and Xbox was like Easy PC or something. It was some weird name, where most computers run off x86 programming language or architecture. I'm a little too dumb to fully understand all of that, but all I know is that the consoles being x86 as they have been in the current and last gen, so the PS4, Xbox One, PS5, Xbox Series, are all x86, just like 99.9% of computers. And why that's nice is that it's much easier for game developers to develop a game that will easily port between the two different platforms and PC. While they obviously still have to do work to make it happen, back in the days of the 360 and the PS3, they essentially had to. I don't want to say that they had to make three, separate games, one for PC, one for PlayStation, one for Xbox, but the porting process was just much more challenging. It also made backwards compatibility really tough with both consoles. And while Xbox has, done a lot of work to try to figure that out, Sony has been very not so concerned about that. So that was interesting. That there's a chance in 2028 they may stop using. I think it's ARM based is what they would be moving to, and ridding themselves of the x86. That also may suggest that they may stop using AMD processors, and that they may move to ARM, who's, I believe it's the company that makes them. That would be a completely different manufacturer. Something else that was really interesting that I noticed in Digital Foundry's coverage of this is that they list a lot of technology when it comes to frame generation and things that really resemble the language around NVIDIA's DLSS. And what was interesting about it is it's all stuff that you heard NVIDIA talking a lot about 4 or 5 years ago, that they're talking about for a console that's still 4 or 5 years away. And why that's interesting is that as far as we know, the Xbox and PlayStation are currently partnered with AMD, and AMD, its hardware, its GPUs are not, at least so far, they aren't even sniffing around DLSS type technology. They're using a much more rudimentary and easier to run FSR system that is just not as good as DLSS. DLSS is substantially really, really good. It's a lot better. And even especially in its current state of, I think it's DLSS 3.5, is just only getting more impressive and more needed. So the implication is that there may be either Xbox or Sony or Xbox or Microsoft might be trying to maybe do some of their own tech with their own GPUs and stuff like that, or that we could see the early stages of a potential NVIDIA partnership with Xbox, which is something I've been talking about for a while. And the reason I think that is I think that you're going to see Sony stick with AMD for cost effectiveness, and because it's worked for them so far. And if the next gen of consoles, the PS6 and whatever Xbox has next, if they're basically just the same console again as they are in this current generation, the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, Microsoft's not going to set itself apart. And so a really good opportunity for them would probably be to make a deal with NVIDIA and kind of lock down that DLSS tech for their own console, and to maybe even go towards a different CPU architecture that they can really, instead of just essentially having the same processor as their competitor, to try to do something big and different. That could backfire in a really big way, and we're going to have to wait and see how that plays out. Another part of this leak was Bethesda's game release date schedule. A big note about this was that this schedule was made and from before the acquisition of Bethesda ZeniMax to Microsoft. And when you read through it, it's pretty apparent because it has Starfield coming out in 2021. It has sequels and games we haven't even heard of yet releasing in 2022 or this year. So some of these things can probably be written off, and that either COVID or other situations have made it so these things just aren't going to happen anymore. Like a Dishonored 3 is probably unlikely, but maybe it's working along in the background and we're still yet to hear from it. So we'll have to wait and see about that. But the Bethesda part of this was not really that interesting, at least in my opinion. A slightly more interesting thing was that there was a list and a bunch of emails that the list was potential games that could be put on Game Pass in 2022, and emails talking about, and a thing that lots of people have talked about in the gaming industry, and that with Starfield getting delayed and Halo Infinite not being as big of a hit as they probably anticipated, Xbox basically had a dead 2022. And so from these emails and stuff, you see that they were the kind of scrambling, trying to figure out, some stuff to put out to keep people on Game Pass. And overall, I think they succeeded. There's lots of really great games on Game Pass. I've never questioned it. I've always been happy to pay for it because at any given time, I have more than a handful of games on my Series X and even on my PC a little bit that I've been happy to just play that way. And it's been great. Game Pass has been awesome, even when Microsoft's first party releases have been lackluster, to say the least. So there were a bunch of games that got listed in this document about this, and basically saying like how much they expected to have to pay to put these games on Game Pass. Some notable ones were Jedi Survivor. I think they thought that they might have to pay $500 million to put that on Game Pass. Again, you have to consider that the idea is that what happens a lot of the time with Game Pass is they basically pay for your development, and then they will pay to at least offset some of the lost sales from people who may have bought the game but instead played on Game Pass. And like there's no chance that Jedi Survivor cost $500 million to make. It was probably like 100 mil. And so Xbox being willing to subsidize developers like that is pretty wild. That's a big deal. That was them making up to EA a lot of Survivor sales if they had made this deal. Now they didn't, and the game released like normal and did really well, even though it had issues. Another notable one that everyone latched onto was Baldur's Gate 3. They projected that they would have only needed to pay $5 million to get Baldur's Gate 3 day one exclusive, or at least day one, I don't know about exclusive, on the Xbox Game Pass. And in hindsight, they probably should have done that. That probably would have been a pretty big deal for them, but instead they had the issues they had with it. A big note on that, the Baldur's Gate 3 thing, is in the description of the game, it notes it as a second run Stadia release, and a bunch of sensational weirdos have turned that into like, oh, they're saying it's second rate. If they were going to say it was second rate, they would have just said second rate. They're Microsoft. They don't care. And second run, from what I've found, just means that it was initially supposed to be a platform exclusive to Stadia. And that's where they signed all their deals. That's where that game was going to come out, at least for some time. But then Stadia obviously shut down, and so the whole idea was that if it came to Game Pass, that would be its like second run, because Game Pass wasn't its primary release platform. So people obviously figured out a way to take that in the worst way possible, and it was pretty lame, but here we are. There was a really interesting part that I'm going to be totally honest, I'm not like super smart enough or knowledgeable enough to fully understand what it was saying, but it was talking a lot about profit margins and stuff like that. It's a big topic because Sony sells so many consoles and they sell a lot of their games, and they have really good games that are very successful, but there is kind of a thought that their profit margin may be like relatively low, like in the single digits to a point, because they spend a lot of money on their games and they spend a lot of money on their hardware, and they don't have like huge margins, where a company like Nintendo and Microsoft maybe don't invest as much into their games and don't have the same intensity that leads them to actually potentially having larger profit margins. And the most interesting part about this is that it's fairly speculative, but I believe it was taken from as much public info as they have, that even though Nintendo, I believe, made more like total money than Xbox, I think it was 2022 or 2021, that Xbox actually had more revenue because their costs were lower. And so all of that stuff is really interesting to me. This also came along with a part of a document that indicated that I think it was like $1.5 billion or something was going to be used to subsidize Xbox console production and sales. People often don't realize that consoles don't if they have a profit at all to their sales company, it's very little, and that most of the money you make is from the items purchased for or on that console. So all of that was interesting. I definitely didn't expect Xbox to have that many, to be doing that well profit wise, but obviously they would like to compete a little more head to head with Sony, I assume. And then the last one here, just some various leadership or email reactions. Phil Spencer's reaction to the PS5 was interesting, where he basically was like, I woke up scared, and then after seeing that presentation, I think we're fine. No, we have better hardware than that, blah 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 blah. And I saw some people like being kind of crappy about that, but like, it's true. Like, I'm fairly certain that from an objective point of view, the Series X is a more powerful console than the PS5. Now, the argument to that is that the PlayStation 5 has way better games, so it doesn't really matter if it is even just a little bit less powerful if it's a platform that people prefer to play on, because it has more stuff to play. And I think that's a fair assessment. I just I don't think this was as big of a deal as people wanted it to be. Phil was just being confident about the company he works for, and I think that's okay. The other thing was a Nintendo acquisition. During a email, Phil Spencer basically said something along the lines of like, my career move would be to buy Nintendo. Like, I think it was said at least a little bit in jest. The email that actually says this basically also then almost immediately points out a bunch of reasons why they would never be able to purchase a whole new a whole other platform. It just wouldn't be realistic. And as much as I saw people trying to do the whole like, well, they would probably just leave them alone, which is probably true. They would probably allow Nintendo to continue making consoles and doing their own thing. I think that that they are tricky there, and that they may have made sure, Nintendo probably would have made sure they couldn't be acquired, and if they did, they would have maybe tried to like self-implode or something before they would have let that happen. So overall, this Xbox leak was like, it had a lot of talkable points. It wasn't really all that interesting, if I have to be personally honest. I thought that most of the stuff that was announced or revealed were things I think everyone kind of assumed were going to be a thing, and I just don't think it was the big blockbuster story some people painted it as. And I especially saw some podcasters and large creators be really bad about just like basically lying about what was in this leak, and just for the sake of trying to get a few extra clicks. So oh well, what are you gonna do? It's never gonna change. Story number 3, Cyberpunk 2077 2.0 patch first impressions. So my take on this is, after playing a lot of Baldur's Gate and Starfield and some other games, over the last couple of years, I figured I would kind of touch base with Cyberpunk again, and I hadn't played since last year around this time. And when I played before the patch, I was like pretty disappointed. It was like, man, this game feels a lot more dated than I thought it would. Its graphics don't really look as good as I hoped they would. And then I remembered, oh yeah, the 2.0 patch is coming. And so I waited for that, and I fired that up, and like, it's better in a lot of ways. I like how things just work. Like the inventory system, just the UI in general has been tightened up quite a bit, and it's pretty good. But I still think that Cyberpunk 2077 is just the okayest game ever. It's not the big sprawling, interactive RPG they kind of promised it would be. It's like a pretty good action game. Its story is fine. Its characters are okay. It's very pretty, and it has some good animations and stuff. I think it's pretty overrated personally. I don't think it's really that good. I find it to be a pretty dead world that looks like it's just like all the civilians are just kind of zombies walking around. Like they don't, there doesn't seem to be any agency or anything really interesting happening there. But it's a good update. It's getting closer and closer to what the initial state of Starfield probably should have been all these years later, and so we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Lies of P review roundup. Lies of P is a Souls-ish game that it has ended up with a 82 average Metacritic score across all the platforms. My thoughts on this are probably not super unexpected. I jumped into this. It's very pretty. It's very responsive. It's a pretty fun game to play. You cannot get me to give a crap about any like Souls-like game. I just do not care. I cannot care. The first time I get killed by some random event or something silly that doesn't feel like I should have died, I basically just gave up. So sorry for any huge Lies of P fans, but it just wasn't for me. I think it's a game that is like a solid game that when people retrieve them, that when people kind of like retrieve their save and kind of get back into when they get into this type of genre, they kind of retrieve those old memories of Dark Souls and all those games they've played, and I think it's really going to hit that niche really hard, and people are going to love it who are into those games. But I don't think it's going to be for me. I played it for a little bit, found myself to be very frustrated and annoyed, deleted it, and now I'm going to play like Animal Party or whatever that new game is. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and I will be right back. Okay, we're back, and my next topic is talking about, I made a video this week about gaming romances. Now, it kind of got snuffed out by the Division 3 news, even by a Mass Effect video I also made about a interview from 2012 with Patrick Weeks, one of the writers at BioWare, and that had a bunch of points that it seems like people just forgot. Things that are probably canon to Mass Effect. So go check out those videos on YouTube, and check out this video where I talked about gaming romances. And what I did is I talked about my experiences with Mass Effect, Cyberpunk 2077, Starfield, and Baldur's Gate 3, and how all of those games romances kind of have strengths and weaknesses, how altogether they would make like a super romance game, and how Starfield is actually better than I thought, especially after getting back into Baldur's Gate 3, after dabbling and getting back into Cyberpunk 2077. Something I think is really interesting is like Mass Effect still holds up really well, even though its relationships are not very expansive and kind of on rails to a point. They're still just very satisfying to take part in. Someone like myself who kind of plays as like I'm controlling that character. I don't necessarily consider myself the player character. It's just it's like watching a movie, and Mass Effect still does so good. Cyberpunk is really weird. Cyberpunk is very much like the rest of the game, where it's a lot of really good flash, and it's also still kind of like shallow as a puddle. Where like Pan Am, there's only 4 romances. It's really interesting how many people dogged how few romances are available in Starfield, who probably didn't dog Cyberpunk for the exact same problem, that there's almost no romances in Cyberpunk, and the ones that are there, you do them and they're cinematic and there's some cool moments, and you kind of have to earn it, at least with like Pan Am. But then like it's just basically a quest line, where like the romances in the other 3 games aren't. They are like, they span multiple different quest lines, and they have different ways for them to kind of initiate and actually fulfill and stuff like that, where Cyberpunk, it's literally just a quest line, and that's fine. And they have the very graphic scenes and stuff like that, like if that's what you prioritize. But like you finish Pan Am's romance, and then she just f's off. I believe that she will like text your phone, and I think there's even some like racy things that can happen, but basically that's it. There's like phone calls and text, and then there's the end of the game where that can kind of be reunited to a point. But like like with Mass Effect, your love interest, you can depending on which game and who they are, they can pal around with you and have some fun lines during missions and blah blah blah. Baldur's Gate 3, in the same capacity, they are with you all the time. You can talk to them in the middle of whatever. It's fairly interactive, and it's not very fleeting. And then even Starfield is like that. Not everyone loves the romances in Starfield. I thought the Sarah romance was actually pretty interesting. And if you're not worried about seeing like a softcore PORN, Starfield's definitely not providing that for you, at least not until the modders get on it. I think the actual like dialogue relationship you can have in Starfield is as good as any of the other 3 games. Now, the animations, the graphics, all of that, are up and down in Starfield, and maybe that's not as satisfying. But I thought it was really interesting. What I came away with was the Mass Effect relationships, relationship systems still hold up pretty well. Cyberpunk 2077 has some really good flash, but it's not very satisfying in the long run. Baldur's Gate 3 is probably the most well-rounded to a point, and have some really satisfying like romantic moments, and kind of it spans the whole game, and it's pretty cool the way it works. And then Starfield is surprisingly good when it comes to that. So I don't know, I just think it's a fun thing to talk about. I'm really curious to how games change that or enhance it in the future, but we'll have to wait and see. Unity, right before I recorded this podcast on Friday afternoon, just announced that they're kind of changing some stuff up. From my previous podcast, you'll know that they basically made everyone mad by putting in fees for every time a player installs a game, or just doing a bunch of shady stuff. It seems like the main thing they did in this pullback was basically say they upped the amount of money that would have to be made to qualify for these fees. And they basically, I believe, said that once you qualify for those fees, it's either you get charged per install, or 2.5% of a revenue share, whatever is cheapest for the developer is what they will pay. And then they said that the info this will be based on is completely self-reported, I believe, by the developer. It's just so weird. Like, even their initial plan that may have been designed to fail so that they could pull back and still leave some of the stuff in there, but like, they still seem like they don't have a way to actually know how much they should charge anyone. Maybe they do from revenue, because that's a fairly static number, but like, it seems like even at this point they still don't have any ability to know how many people install a game, and they're just purely trusting the developers and studios to report that accurately, which like most of them will, because they have integrity and stuff. But like, it's just such an odd choice they've made here, and this saga seems like it's going to kind of continue on, at least for a little bit longer. And like I think I said last week, I think they'll bump back. And there are a lot of devs that use Unity. There's a lot of devs that are dependent on Unity, and there's a lot of projects that are pretty far in that can't really just switch at the last minute. But I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 10 years, 5-10 years, you see maybe some competitors rise up a bit more. Unreal's stake maybe rise up as well, depending on your whether you think that's a good thing or not is up to you. And I think Unity can recover somewhat, but probably semi-permanently kind of screwed themselves over. We had an announcement this week that Criterion Games has joined EA Entertainment. Criterion, the makers of Burnout and things like that, obviously most of those devs are not there anymore. But the notable thing about this is that apparently they are going to be mostly working on Battlefield. Criterion was already an EA studio, but they were under EA Sports, making the racing games and things like that. And they were probably doing support studio stuff for other studios. And now we know that they are officially under EA Entertainment, which is the Battlefields and the single player games and things like that. And I believe the press statement basically said that they will be working on Battlefield, which they've done before. So that's exciting, I guess. I'm glad Criterion still exists. But I think a lot of people lament that they aren't making their own games anymore, and that people wish they could. In a surprising but not really story, Glenn Schofield is leaving Striking Distance Studios less than a year after the Callisto Protocol released and flopped. This was an interesting one, because I remember in 2022, during, I think it was the Game Awards, Glenn Schofield going on to, he's was one of the creators of like Dead Space when he was at EA, and then he left and tried to do his own studio, and now he's leaving that studio he just created, as well as a bunch of the other execs, and kind of flipping them the bird, in my opinion. I remember he went on to Jeff Keighley's, I think it was Summer Game Fest, and like basically just slobbered over Jeff for like 5 minutes and barely talked about his game and just talked about how great Jeff is. And like, it was so gross and so weird. And then this game showed, and like when it first showed, I remember being like, oh, this looks pretty cool. This looks like Dead Space. And then the more and more they showed, I was like, man, this seems like you mostly just punch these things and hit them with sharp weapons. And, you know, the best thing about Dead Space, in my opinion, are the guns and dismemberment and all that. And, you know, then Callisto Protocol came out. It seemed like people like tried to really enjoy it, and then it just didn't hit, and they all just gave up. And you know, Glenn Schofield, you know, is leaving now, even though he just built the studio from scratch, and most of these people probably came to work for him, and now he's bouncing on them. So I think it's a pretty lame move. I think he is just trying to bounce and try probably to save a bunch of money and to pass off the issues at that studio to someone else. And that kind of seems like it's what's happening. So that's a big bummer. You hate to see that. That at least right now, there's no indication that the studio is going to shut down. But without Schofield, I mean, it seems like he was kind of the DNA of that studio. I'd be pretty surprised if they continue on much longer, and those devs don't just try to find maybe a more consistent job. Sea of Stars first impression, man, I fired that thing up, played about 30 minutes of it, and said nope. I'm not really into that art style of games. I know that's a popular thing for some people. It's not for me. I just can't get into another turn-based, really long RPG. I just can't do it. Baldur's Gate 3 is the only game I'm willing to sacrifice that to right now. So maybe one day I'll check out Sea of Stars. This first impression was just not very good, and I'm perfectly happy to not be playing it. There's lots of other things to play. The final thing is here is just a personal announcement for the podcast and for anyone listening. I will be doing a N7 Day 2023 giveaway. I have 3 sets of prizes. They'll all be the same set. You'll get a Blasto figure of the the Blasto fame, an N7 car badge, N7 coffee mug, N7 glass, and N7 Stein. Like I said, I'll be picking 3 winners. The contest will start a week before N7 Day, so it should be on the 1st. And then we'll end a week after, I believe on the 14th. And so you'll have a couple weeks to enter the giveaway. The prizes are also going to include a Mass Effect Legendary Edition of your choice of platform. So be on the lookout for that. I'm excited to do that giveaway. You can check out my I suggest following either my YouTube and or my Twitter account. They're both under Bon Diesel. This is where we normally do listener questions. I'm recording this a few hours earlier than I normally do, so I think people didn't really have time to give their questions. If they give them later, I will respond to them next week. But you know, next week, if you want me to answer anything or talk about any topics or even just speculate about some stuff, be sure to check out my Discord, where I have a whole room just for answering questions on the podcast. I also have a Google form that's linked on my Twitter and on the Discord, and on Twitter. I post every Thursday or Friday asking for questions, topics, things like that. So you can give me your thoughts on any of those, and I'll be more than happy to talk about whatever you want me to comment on within reason. And that's where I'm going to wrap up this slightly shorter episode than other recent ones. So thank you so much for listening. If you have any feedback or thoughts or advice, I'm happy to take it. This podcast is slowly growing, which is actually really exciting. And it seems like you all liked these episodes releasing on Saturday morning a lot more than Monday morning. So it's cool seeing more people showing up. And I really appreciate it. This is a fun project for me. We're over 250 episodes now. I'm really proud of this, and I'm really proud of you for listening. You can find me all over the internet as Bon Diesel, including on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and over on Twitch, where I stream a couple times a week, and love to talk about these same topics more in a live action setting. If you want to support my content, check out my Patreon at patreon.com/Bon Diesel. There's some perks over there. You can subscribe over at Twitch, where you can get some emotes and some fun stuff there, as well as a special name in the Discord, by the way, a special category. And you can also use your Amazon Prime sub there. I would very much appreciate it. Or you can click on the link in the description below and find my merch store, where I think I have some simple but kind of nice merch. I highly suggest the coffee mug. That's all I have for this one. So until next time.